I'm Georgia, 28 female. I work as an archivist, spending my days in the quiet, climate-controlled silence of history, preserving the legacies of others. It's a peaceful life, a stark contrast to the one I survived. My world now is one of careful order and cataloged facts, a fortress I built to protect myself from the chaotic, painful memories of the house I grew up in, ruled by my stepfather, Marcus. For years, I believed that escape was the only victory I could hope for. But a single act of his breathtaking cruelty showed me that justice wasn't about running away. It was about methodically, and publicly, taking back everything that was stolen. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Chapter 1: Old Life, Old Scars. The house I grew up in wasn't a home, it was a museum, but not a public one filled with shared history and wonder. It was a private shrine to one man's ego, Marcus. My mother, Isabel, met him when I was 7 years old. She was a brilliant art gallery curator with a light in her eyes that could rival any masterpiece she hung on the walls. I was a happy kid, content with our small apartment filled with books and my mother's laughter. Then Marcus entered our lives, a wealthy investor with a portfolio as vast as his sense of entitlement. He swept my mother off her feet with promises of security and a life of leisure. What he gave her instead was a gilded cage. His house was a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city, cold and imposing, with more rooms than our laughter could ever fill. He didn't collect art, as my mother did. He collected things he could quantify, things with a price tag that could be recited to impress his guests: vintage wines, first edition books, and rare watches. Each item was a testament to his success, a brick in the fortress of his arrogance. My mother's passion for art was slowly extinguished, dismissed as a frivolous hobby. Her job was the first thing to go. "A woman of your stature shouldn't have to work," he'd said, a statement that sounded like a gift but was, in reality, the first tightening of the leash. Soon, her friends were deemed not of our class, and her world shrank to the four walls of Marcus's museum. My childhood was a masterclass in walking on eggshells. Marcus's abuse wasn't the kind that left visible bruises, it was the insidious kind that eroded your soul. It was the constant criticism disguised as constructive feedback. My grades were never good enough. My hobbies were childish. My presence was an inconvenience. He had a chillingly calm way of speaking that made his cruelty cut deeper. "Georgia," he'd say, his voice a low, smooth monotone, "it is a disappointment that for all the resources I provide, you show so little potential." He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. The silent, suffocating weight of his disapproval was his weapon. My mother, a ghost of her former self, drifted through the hallways. She tried to protect me in small ways, a whispered word of encouragement when he wasn't around, a secret slice of cake after he'd gone to bed. But she was trapped, paralyzed by fear and a sense of financial helplessness he had so carefully engineered. He controlled every cent. She had no bank account of her own, no car in her name. He called it managing the family's assets. I called it what it was: total control. My only lifeline was my best friend, Chloe. We lived on the same street before my mother met Marcus, and she was the only piece of my old life I was allowed to keep, mainly because her parents were respected lawyers, and Marcus approved of the connection. Chloe saw what he was. While other adults were charmed by his wealth and feigned sophistication, Chloe saw the coldness in his eyes. She saw how I flinched when he entered a room, how my mother's smile never quite reached her eyes. Her house became my sanctuary. Her family's chaotic, warm, and loving home was a world away from the sterile silence of my own. The prized possessions were the center of Marcus's universe. His wine cellar was his sanctum sanctorum, a multi-million-dollar collection of bottles from vineyards that had long since turned to dust. He knew the story of every bottle, not for the love of the craft, but for the story he could tell about how much it was worth and how cleverly he had acquired it. He would host lavish tasting parties where he would hold court, pontificating for hours while his guests, mostly sycophants and business associates, nodded in awe. I was occasionally paraded out, a prop to demonstrate his supposed generosity in raising another man's child. I learned to perfect a bland, non-threatening smile, a mask of compliance that hid the simmering resentment beneath. He had one rule, a commandment that was never to be broken. No one entered the wine cellar W. Without him, it was his sacred space. One afternoon, when I was 15, I was chasing our cat, a small stray I had secretly adopted and kept hidden in my room. The cat, spooked by a closing door, darted down the stairs and slipped through the cellar door, which Marcus had foolishly left ajar. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew what would happen if he found the cat. I crept down the cold stone steps, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and old grapes. And that's when I saw it. Tucked behind a rack of priceless Bordeaux, there was a small, locked safe. It was modern, sleek, and utterly out of place amongst the ancient wooden racks. I had no idea what was inside, but a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was in that safe was the source of his power, the true heart of his kingdom. I managed to grab the cat and sneak out undetected. But the image of that safe was seared into my brain. It became a symbol of all the secrets and control that defined our lives. It was another lock on my mother's cage, another bar on the window of my childhood. I escaped that house the day I turned 18. I took a single suitcase, the small savings I had scraped together from part-time jobs he didn't know about, and I never looked back. I went to college, got my degree, and built a life for myself that was entirely my own. I kept in touch with my mother through brief, stilted phone calls, her words always chosen carefully as if Marcus were listening in, and he probably was. I had my freedom, but she was still a prisoner. I told myself it was her choice, that I couldn't save someone who wouldn't save herself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I had escaped the museum, but the curator was still trapped inside. Chapter 2: The Final Insult. For 10 years, I maintained a fragile peace. My contact with Marcus was non-existent, and my conversations with my mother were carefully scheduled, occurring only when I knew she would be alone. She would call from a burner phone she kept hidden, her voice a hurried whisper. During these calls, she painted a picture of a life that had only grown more isolated. Marcus's control had become absolute. He had installed security cameras throughout the house, for their protection, he claimed. Her allowance had been cut further. Her health was failing, a collection of stress-related ailments that he dismissed as hypochondria. My life, in contrast, was a quiet rebellion. As an archivist, my work was about finding truth in the past, about piecing together narratives from forgotten documents. I found a deep, satisfying peace in the meticulous order of my work. I had my own apartment, my own friends, and my own money. I had Chloe, now a sharp-witted and fiercely loyal paralegal, who remained my staunchest ally. She was the one person who understood the full scope of what I'd survived. "You didn't just survive, Georgia," she'd often correct me. "You escaped, there's a difference." The final insult, the act that shattered my carefully constructed peace, came on a Tuesday morning. It arrived not with a bang, but with a cold, sterile email from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple: regarding the estate of Isabel Morrow. My blood ran cold. I fumbled to open it, my hands shaking. Isabel Morrow. He hadn't even allowed her to use his last name in her final affairs. The email was brief and brutally formal. It informed me that my mother had passed away 2 days prior from a sudden heart attack. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over me. 2 days. She had been gone for 2 days, and he hadn't even bothered to call me. He had a lawyer send an email. I collapsed into my chair, the world dissolving into a blur of tears and rage. My first call was to Chloe, my voice breaking as I relayed the news. She was at my apartment in 20 minutes, her expression a mixture of fury and heartbreak. The email contained details about the funeral service, a small, private affair to be held that Friday. It concluded with a chillingly detached sentence: "Mr. Marcus has requested that you refrain from contacting him directly and forward any inquiries to our office." He was shutting me out, even in grief. He wanted to control the narrative of her death just as he had controlled her life. Chloe took over, her paralegal instincts kicking in. "This is wrong, Georgia, all of it. Let me make some calls." While I sat numbly on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, Chloe worked the phone. She called the hospital where my mother had been taken. She called the coroner's office. The official story was straightforward: a massive coronary event, no signs of foul play. But Chloe dug deeper. She got a nurse on the line, a compassionate woman who remembered my mother's final moments. The nurse told Chloe that my mother had been brought in by ambulance. Marcus had not been with her. He had a parent. TLY discovered her and called for help, but didn't ride with her to the hospital. He arrived nearly 2 hours later, calm and composed, to identify the body and handle the paperwork. The nurse had found it odd. He seemed more annoyed than bereaved, she'd whispered to Chloe. Like his schedule had been disrupted. That night, fueled by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight, I drove to the house. I don't know what I intended to do. Scream at him? Demand answers? I just knew I couldn't stay away. I parked down the street and walked up the long, winding driveway. The house was lit up, but not in a somber way. Music was playing, faint but unmistakable. Jazz, Marcus's favorite. Peering through the large bay window of the living room, I saw him. He was standing by his bar, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He wasn't alone. A woman was with him, much younger, with a hard, polished beauty. She laughed at something he said, placing a hand on his arm. They were drinking. There was no sign of mourning, no hint of loss. It was as if my mother had been a piece of furniture he'd finally managed to get rid of, leaving a space for something new and shiny. The sight broke something inside me. The dam of detached peace I had built over a decade shattered into a million pieces, and what rushed in was a torrent of pure, cold fury. This was the final insult. He had not only erased her in life, but was now dancing on her grave. He had taken her light, her joy, her career, her friends, her health, and finally, her very existence, and felt nothing. He was celebrating. I stumbled back to my car, my mind reeling. The grief was still there, a raw, open wound. But now it had a new companion, a quiet, crystalline purpose. He would not get away with this. He would not erase her. I had spent my life being his quiet, compliant victim. That was over. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of my mother's pain and my fear. I was going to be the one to burn it to the ground. I didn't know how yet, but as I drove away from that house for the last time, leaving the sound of his laughter behind, a plan began to form in the ashes of my heartbreak. He loved his possessions more than any person. His identity was built on his collection of priceless things, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that was his weakness. That was where I would strike. Chapter 3: A Seed of Vengeance. The funeral was a hollow, performative affair. It was held in a small, obscenely expensive chapel, attended by a handful of Marcus's business associates and their wives. They offered me clumsy, insincere condolences, their eyes darting around as if assessing the value of the floral arrangements. I saw no one from my mother's old life, none of her gallery friends, no family. It was a funeral for a stranger. Marcus stood at the front, the picture of a grieving widower. He wore a tailored black suit and a somber expression that I knew was as fake as the diamonds on his new companion's wrist. She stood slightly behind him. Her name was Tiffany, I later learned, and she looked bored. He gave a brief, passionless eulogy filled with empty platitudes about my mother's gentle spirit and quiet dignity. He spoke of her as if she were a decorative object he had been fond of. Every word was a lie, a carefully crafted stone laid over the truth of her life. I didn't speak. I just sat in the front row, a silent observer, letting my rage solidify into something hard and sharp. Chloe sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm, a small anchor in a sea of hypocrisy. After the service, as people milled about, Marcus approached me. It was the first time we had been face to face in a decade. "Georgia," he said, his voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you." "You have no idea," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. He either missed or ignored the edge in my tone. "Your mother, she wouldn't have wanted a fuss. She was a simple woman." He said simple like it was a defect. "Now, about her things," he continued, getting to the point with sickening efficiency. "There isn't much. Some clothes, books, I'll have them boxed up and sent to you. Consider it a final gift." That was it, her entire life, reduced to a few boxes he couldn't wait to discard. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking disrespect, was the final spark. "And the house?" I asked, my voice flat. "Her name was on the deed, I believe. She told me you put it in both your names when you married." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly masked. "A legal formality. The estate, of course, reverts to me as the surviving spouse. It's all been handled by my lawyers." He was dismissing me, closing the book on my mother's existence. But he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated me. He still saw me as the timid, fearful child who flinched when he entered a room. He had no idea who I had become. That night, Chloe and I sat in my apartment, the S. Islands thick with unspoken grief and anger. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, had already been busy. Spread across my coffee table were documents she had procured. A copy of my mother and Marcus's marriage certificate, property records for the house, and a preliminary credit report she had run on him. "He's lying, Georgia," she said, her finger tapping the property record. "Your mom's name is right there. Isabel Morrow Vaughn and Marcus Vaughn as joint tenants with right of survivorship. That means when one dies, the other automatically gets the whole property. He's right about that part." "So he gets everything," I said, the words tasting like ash. "The house, the money, all of it. He erases her and gets rewarded." "Not necessarily," Chloe said, a glint in her eye. "Joint tenancy means he gets the house. But what's in the house? That's a different story. Her personal property, anything she owned before the marriage, or anything gifted specifically to her, that's part of her estate. And as her only child, you are the sole heir to her personal estate." A thought, cold and clear, began to form in my mind. "Her things?" He said he'd send them in a box. "He thinks her things are just clothes and books," Chloe said, catching on immediately. "He's arrogant. He assumes everything of value is his." The seed of vengeance began to sprout. It was an idea so audacious, so daring, that it took my breath away. Marcus was leaving for Europe in 2 weeks. He had mentioned it at the funeral, a pre-planned business trip he couldn't possibly cancel. He would be gone for a month, a whole month. The house, the museum of his ego, would be empty, save for a weekly cleaning service. "Chloe," I said, my voice low and steady, "what defines personal property?" Chloe leaned forward, her expression turning from one of comfort to one of intense focus. "Legally, it can be complicated, but generally it's movable property. Things not affixed to the house. Furniture, art, jewelry, collectibles." "Collectibles," I repeated, the word hanging in the air. "Like vintage wine or first edition books." A slow smile spread across Chloe's face. "He would argue they are his. He'd say he bought them with his money. But what if he didn't? What if they were gifts? What if, over 20 years of marriage, a loving husband gifted his wife some of his most prized possessions?" The plan began to bloom in my mind, intricate and beautiful in its destructive potential. Marcus had built his identity on these objects. They weren't just things to him, they were extensions of himself. Taking them wouldn't just be theft, it would be an evisceration of his very soul. "His records," I whispered, thinking aloud. "He's meticulous. He keeps records of everything. Insurance appraisals, acquisition dates, certificates of authenticity. He keeps them in his office." "And the safe," I added, my mind flashing back to that day in the cellar. "The one behind the wine rack." "We'd need proof," Chloe cautioned, her legal mind already identifying the hurdles. "We can't just say they were gifts. We'd need documentation, something that ties her to them." "He would never be that careless," I said, a wave of disappointment washing over me. "Maybe not," Chloe mused. "But your mother was an art curator. She knew how to document provenance. And you're an archivist. You know how to find things people think are lost. And you also know how to create records that look indistinguishable from the real thing." My heart began to pound. It was a terrifying, exhilarating thought. We wouldn't just be taking his things. We would be creating a perfectly legal, perfectly documented paper trail that proved they were never his to begin with. They were part of my mother's estate. And they were now mine. mine to do with as I pleased. "He's going to be gone for a month," I said, looking at Chloe, my eyes reflecting the flickering flame of my newfound purpose. "The house will be empty." "A month is a long time," she replied, her smile widening. "Long enough to conduct a very thorough and professional estate liquidation." The seed of vengeance had taken root, and I was going to nurture it until it grew into a forest fire that would consume Marcus's entire world. Chapter 4: The Silent Auction. The 2 weeks leading up to Marcus's departure were the most intense of my life. My grief for my mother was a constant, aching presence, but it now served as fuel for my mission. Every tear I shed was a reminder of what he had taken and what he now owed. Chloe and I worked with the precision of a military operation. Our objective: to dismantle Marcus's kingdom, piece by valuable piece. Our first task was reconnaissance. Chloe's firm had a private investigator on retainer, a gruff but brilliant man named Frank. We hired him, feeding him a story about a contested inheritance. His job was to get us the layout of the house, the security system details, and the schedule of the cleaning. Crew, within 3 days he delivered. We got blueprints, the alarm company's name, the access codes. They were, predictably, Marcus's birthday, and the knowledge that the cleaners came every Thursday between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. While Frank worked, my job was the forgery. This was my area of expertise. As an archivist, I understood paper, ink, and the subtle art of aging. I spent hours in specialized stationery stores and online forums for historical reenactors, purchasing period-appropriate paper and different types of ink. My target was Marcus's collection records. I knew he kept them in a specific filing cabinet in his office. My goal was to create gift deeds and letters that would retroactively transfer ownership of his most prized possessions to my mother. I fabricated letters written in what I mimicked as Marcus's hand, a looping, arrogant script I had seen on countless birthday cards. These notes, dated over a span of 15 years, were short and believable. "My dearest Isabel, for our 10th anniversary, a small token of my affection. May this 1945 Romane Conti bring you as much joy as you have brought me. Another for a collection of Hemingway first editions. To my lovely wife, who appreciates the classics. Happy birthday." I crafted gift deeds, using legal templates Chloe provided, for his collection of Patek Philippe watches. Each document was a work of art. I used different pens, slightly altered the signature over the years, and even created subtle water stains and creases to make them look authentic. I was creating a history that never was, a counter-narrative to his tyranny. The most critical piece was the safe in the cellar. I had no idea what was inside, but I knew it was important. Frank, the PI, couldn't get near it, but he did identify the brand. A quick search online revealed it was a high-end model, but not infallible. Chloe found a contact, a security consultant who specialized in non-destructive entry. He was expensive, but Chloe negotiated, framing it as a legal asset recovery. The day Marcus left for Europe, I watched from my car down the street as a town car picked him up. I waited a full 24 hours to be safe, then our operation began. On a Wednesday morning, Chloe and I, along with the locksmith, arrived at the house. Disarming the alarm with Marcus's birthday was laughably easy. Walking into that house again was surreal. It was exactly as I remembered, cold, silent, and suffocating. But this time, I wasn't a scared child. I was an avenging angel. While the locksmith went to work on the cellar safe, Chloe and I went straight to Marcus's office. His filing cabinet was locked, but it was a simple lock, and our expert had it open in minutes. We found exactly what I expected: meticulously organized files for every major asset. Insurance appraisals, purchase receipts, certificates of authenticity. We carefully removed the original ownership documents and replaced them with my forgeries. We planted the letters in a box of old correspondence I knew my mother kept in her closet. It was a painstaking process, but we worked in perfect sync. Downstairs, the locksmith finally called out. The safe was open. Chloe and I rushed down. My heart hammered against my ribs as I peered inside. It didn't contain cash or gold. It contained ledgers, stacks of them, and a series of USB drives. I pulled out the top ledger. The entries were coded, but I recognized names: local politicians, zoning board members, city inspectors. Next to their names were dates and figures. It was a record of bribes, decades of them. The USB drives contained scanned copies of bank transfers, incriminating photos, and recorded conversations. This wasn't just his dirty laundry, it was the source of his entire empire. He hadn't built his success on clever investments, he'd built it on corruption. This was his real treasure, the one he couldn't display on a shelf. This was his leverage, his power, his soul. And now it was mine. We copied every single file from the drives onto a new, encrypted hard drive. We took the original ledgers. We left the safe empty, save for a single, perfect photograph of my mother in her youth, smiling and radiant from before she ever met him. Now for the main event, the silent auction. We couldn't just sell the items to a pawn shop. They needed to be laundered, sold through channels that were both lucrative and untraceable back to us. Chloe's legal mind was invaluable here. She created a shell corporation, a boutique estate liquidation firm, with a name that sounded vaguely European and incredibly exclusive. Heritage Solutions, she called it. We hired a team of professional movers and art handlers, telling them we were executing a legal estate settlement on behalf of a client who wished to remain anonymous. Over the next 2 weeks, they carefully packed and removed everything of value. The entire wine cellar, valued at over $8 million. The library of Firsty. Dishon books worth nearly $2 million. His collection of 6 rare watches, another $1 million. We took the furniture, the rugs, the silver. We emptied the museum. Chloe, through Heritage Solutions, reached out to a network of private collectors and high-end auction houses in other countries. We sold the wine to a syndicate in Hong Kong, the books to a collector in Dubai, and the watches through a private dealer in Geneva. The money was wired into the Shell Corporation's account, then immediately transferred through a series of other accounts before finally landing in a trust Chloe had established in my mother's name. As the final truck pulled away, I stood in the echoing emptiness of the house. The walls were bare, marked only by the faint outlines of where priceless objects used to hang. The air felt lighter. The oppressive weight of Marcus's ego was gone. The house was just a house again, a shell. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps loud in the silence. For the first time, it didn't feel like his house. It felt like a blank slate. The silent auction was complete. We had raised just over $12 million. But the money wasn't the point. It was about erasure. I had taken his identity, his history, his pride, and turned it into vapor. But I wasn't done yet. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2, the public humiliation, was about to begin. Chapter 5, Weaving the Web. With Marcus's prized possessions turned into untraceable funds and the evidence of his corruption secured, the stage was set for the final act. The goal was no longer just to ruin him financially. It was to obliterate his reputation, to expose the rotten core beneath the polished veneer he presented to the world. We needed a public stage, a moment of maximum impact where his downfall would be witnessed by the very people he sought to impress. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the society pages of the local newspaper. The St. Jude's Hospital Foundation Gala, the city's premier philanthropic event, was scheduled for the week after Marcus was due back from Europe. And this year's Philanthropist of the Year award was being presented to none other than Marcus Vaughan, in recognition of a large donation he had made. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The donation was, of course, a tax write-off and a public relations move. He would be giving a speech, accepting an award in a room full of the city's most influential people. It was perfect. Our plan was a 2-pronged attack, legal and public. Chloe took the lead on the legal front. She meticulously organized the contents of the ledgers and USB drives into a comprehensive dossier. It was a roadmap of Marcus's corruption, detailing 2 decades of bribery, zoning manipulation, and blackmail. She drafted an anonymous letter to the district attorney's office, the state attorney general, and the IRS. The letter wouldn't be sent from us. It would come from a disgruntled former employee, of one of the politicians Marcus had bribed, complete with fabricated details that made the source believable. The package would contain copies of the most damning evidence and a promise that the originals would be released to the press if no action was taken. "We have to time this perfectly," Chloe explained, her eyes alight with strategic fire. "We'll have a courier deliver the packages the morning of the gala. It'll give the authorities just enough time to open them, realize what they have, and maybe even get a preliminary warrant started. The wheels of justice will just start to turn as Marcus is stepping up to the podium." My role was the public-facing part of the attack. I needed to ensure that the story wasn't just a legal matter but a public spectacle. I used some of the funds from our silent auction to hire a freelance investigative journalist, a man named Ben Carter who had a reputation for being a bulldog. I approached him anonymously, through an encrypted email account, as a source with a major story on civic corruption. I sent him a small, tantalizing piece of evidence, a single recorded phone call of Marcus discussing a zoning change with a city councilman, just enough to hook him. Ben was hooked. He replied within an hour, hungry for more. Over the next week, I spoon-fed him information from the dossier, letting him think he was uncovering the story himself. I painted a picture of a benevolent philanthropist who was secretly the kingpin of a criminal enterprise. I also wove in the story of my mother. I told him about a man who emotionally and financially abused his wife, isolating her and controlling her until the stress literally broke her heart. I provided him with copies of the fake gift deeds and letters, presenting them as proof of how Marcus was now attempting to steal his late wife's personal assets from her grieving daughter. "He's trying to erase her," I wrote, "and claim everything she owned. The man is a monster, and he's about to be celebrated as a saint." The final piece of the web was the gala itself. We needed to control the narrative inside that ballroom. Chloe, using her connections, secured 2 tickets to the event, but we wouldn't be the main attraction. The main attraction would be Marcus's own world crumbling around him on a massive screen. I contacted the event's AV company, pretending to be Marcus's new assistant. "Mr. Vaughn has prepared a special tribute video for his late wife, Isabel," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "He wants it to play as a surprise just before he begins his acceptance speech. It's a very emotional tribute, a final farewell. He's asked me to coordinate the technical aspects with you directly to ensure it's perfect." The AV technician was more than happy to oblige. I sent him a file, not of a tribute, but of a carefully edited presentation. It began with that beautiful, radiant photo of my mother. But then, it would transition. It would show scans of the forged gift deeds, followed by images of the now empty rooms in the house. It would display quotes from Marcus's hollow eulogy next to photos of him laughing with Tiffany just days after my mother's death. The centerpiece was a series of audio clips from the USB drives, short, damning snippets of his conversations, subtitled for clarity. The finale was a simple, stark text on the screen. "Everything he owned was built on the suffering of others. The house is empty. The money is gone. This is for Isabel." The trap was set. The legal time bombs were ready to be delivered. The journalist was primed to publish his exposé the moment the scandal broke. The gala attendees were about to witness a performance, but not the one they were expecting. Marcus was flying home, completely oblivious to a hero's welcome. He thought he was returning to his kingdom. He had no idea he was walking into his own public execution. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The rage was still there, but it was now a cold, focused instrument. The web was woven. All we had to do was wait for the fly to walk into it. Chapter 6: The Connoisseur's Catastrophe. The night of the gala was electric with anticipation, though only Chloe and I knew the true reason. We arrived dressed to blend in, 2 anonymous faces in a sea of the city's elite. I wore a simple black dress, the opposite of the glittering gowns around me. It felt like a statement of mourning and purpose. We found our seats at a table near the back, giving us a perfect view of the stage and the 3 large screens that flanked it. Marcus arrived with Tiffany on his arm. He was radiant, soaking in the admiration like a dying plant in the sun. He moved through the room with an owner's entitlement, shaking hands, accepting pats on the back, his laughter booming across the ballroom. He looked like a king in his court, completely unaware that his castle had already been turned to dust. I watched him, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of finality. The evening dragged on with tedious speeches and lukewarm dinner. Finally, the moment arrived. The Foundation's president took the stage to announce the Philanthropist of the Year award. He launched into a fawning introduction, listing Marcus's supposed virtues and his generous contributions to the community. As he spoke, I sent a single, pre-written text to Ben, the journalist. Now, I imagined him hitting publish on his article, sending the story of Marcus's corruption out into the digital world. At the same time, I knew the couriers had delivered their packages to the DA's office and the IRS. The gears were turning. And now, the president boomed, to accept his award and say a few words, a true pillar of our community, Mr. Marcus Vaughn. The room erupted in applause. Marcus stood up, beaming, and kissed Tiffany before striding confidently to the stage. He accepted the heavy glass award, holding it up for all to see. Thank you, he began, his voice smooth as aged brandy. I am truly humbled. Philanthropy isn't about giving, it's about building a legacy of strength, integrity. As he spoke, he nodded to the AV technician at the back of the room. And speaking of legacy, I would like to begin by paying tribute to my late wife, Isabel. She was the bedrock of my life, and her recent passing has left a void that can never be filled. I've prepared a small tribute to her memory. He turned to the main screen, a look of performative sadness on his face. This was it. The screen flickered to life. The beautiful, smiling photograph of my mother appeared, just as planned. A few people in the audience murmured awe. Marcus smiled wistfully. Then the picture dissolved. It was replaced by an image of the forged gift deed for the 1945 Romane Conti. Marcus's smile faltered, his brow furrowed in confusion. The slide changed again, showing the deed for the Hemingway first editions. Then the watches. His face went from confused to alarmed. The screen split, showing side-by-side images. On the left, his lavish, fully furnished living room. On the right, the same room, stark, empty, and barren. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an explanation. Then the audio began. It was his voice, captured on the USB drive, cold and clinical. The zoning variance is a sure thing, his recorded voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. Councilman Miller is on the payroll. He knows how it works. The audience gasped. Councilman Miller, who was sitting 2 tables away from us, went pale as a sheet. The screen now showed a copy of a bank transfer to an offshore account in Miller's name. The next audio clip played. Just make sure the inspection is favorable. Another donation to your youth sports league is already on its way. This was followed by a photo of Marcus shaking hands with the city's head building inspector. Marcus was frozen on the stage, the award hanging limply in his hand. His face had drained of all color. He looked trapped, a deer in the headlights of his own making. The presentation continued, a relentless barrage of his own crimes. It showed the empty wine cellar, the bare library shelves, and then the final slides. First, a photo of him and Tiffany laughing on the day of my mother's funeral. The audible gasps in the room were sharp and angry. Finally, the screen went black, and white text appeared, stark and damning. Everything he owned was built on the suffering of others. The house is empty. The money is gone. This is for Isabel. The room was utterly silent for a moment, the only sound Marcus's ragged breathing into the microphone. Then, phones began to light up all over the ballroom as people started seeing the news alerts from Ben's just-published article. The murmur grew into a roar of shocked conversation. Marcus stumbled back from the podium, his eyes wild with panic and disbelief. He looked out at the sea of faces, faces that had adored him moments before, now looking at him with contempt and disgust. He had been stripped bare in front of the entire world he had worked so hard to conquer. And then, as if on cue, the main doors of the ballroom burst open. 2 uniformed police officers and 2 stern-looking detectives in suits strode in. They walked directly towards the stage. One of the detectives spoke, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "Marcus Vaughn, you need to come with us." The connoisseur's catastrophe was complete. He didn't even resist. He dropped the glass award, and it shattered on the stage, the sound echoing the shattering of his life. As the police led him away, his hands cuffed behind his back, his eyes frantically scanned the crowd, and for a brief second, they met mine. In them, I didn't see hatred or anger. I saw something far more satisfying, pure, unadulterated shock and the dawning, horrific understanding that the quiet, insignificant girl he had tormented for years had been the architect of his absolute ruin. I gave him a small, simple nod, a final acknowledgement, a final goodbye. Chapter 7: A New Dawn. The aftermath of the gala was cataclysmic. Ben Carter's exposé went viral, and the story was picked up by national news outlets. The tale of the corrupt philanthropist brought down by his abused stepdaughter was too compelling to ignore. The city's elite, who had once clamored for Marcus's attention, now tripped over themselves to denounce him. His name became synonymous with scandal. Marcus was charged with a litany of crimes, including bribery, fraud, and tax evasion. The evidence from the ledgers was irrefutable. Councilman Miller and several other city officials were also arrested, leading to the biggest corruption scandal in the city's history. Facing a mountain of evidence and the prospect of decades in prison, Marcus took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal facility. His reputation was not just tarnished, it was vaporized. He lost everything: his freedom, his standing, his name. Tiffany, his fair-weather companion, disappeared from the scene the day after the arrest, but not before giving a tearful, exclusive interview about how she had been deceived by a monster. Chloe and I laughed when we read it. My role in the affair was speculated upon, but never proven. I was the anonymous source, the grieving daughter. Ben Carter protected his source fiercely, and the intricate web Chloe and I had woven left no direct trail back to us. The forged documents were seen as my mother's desperate attempt to secure her own assets from a controlling husband, a narrative that painted her as a tragic victim and me as a daughter fighting for her mother's legacy. It was a fiction that served the truth beautifully. The $12 million sat in the trust Chloe had established. At first, I didn't know what to do. Oh, with it, it felt like blood money, tainted by years of pain, but Chloe helped me see it differently. "This isn't his money, Georgia," she said one evening as we sat on my balcony overlooking the city. "This is your mother's. It's hazard pay. It's reparations for a life of service under a tyrant. Use it to honor her." And so I did. I created the Isabel Morau Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting 2 things she had lost: emerging female artists and shelters for victims of domestic abuse. I endowed a gallery space for new artists to display their work, free of charge. I funded a new wing of a local women's shelter, providing not just beds, but legal aid, job training, and therapy, all the things my mother never had access to. The foundation became my new passion, a way to transmute the ugliness of the past into something beautiful and constructive. The house, legally Marcus's, was seized by the government as part of his asset forfeiture. It was eventually auctioned off. I didn't attend. I never wanted to set foot in that place again. It held no power over me anymore. A few months after Marcus was sentenced, I received a letter in the mail, forwarded from my old address. It was from him, written on prison stationery. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a threat. It was a single, bewildered question. Why? The letter was pathetic, the writing of a man who still, after everything, could not comprehend that his actions had consequences, that the people he saw as insignificant could ever rise up against him. I didn't need to write back. My answer was all around me. It was in the new gallery buzzing with young artists. It was in the grateful eyes of the women at the shelter. It was in the quiet peace I felt at the end of each day. I had my mother's real legacy now, not the one Marcus tried to invent in his hollow eulogy, but one built from the ashes of her pain. I had taken the ugliest parts of my life and used them to build something filled with hope. My work as an archivist continues, but now I feel like I am not just preserving the pasts of others, I am actively shaping the future. My life is no longer about survival or escape. It's about creation. The scars are still there, faint white lines on my soul, but they no longer hurt. They are just a part of my story, a reminder of the darkness that had to exist for me to truly appreciate the light. There is a quiet strength in knowing you have faced the worst of your past and not only survived it, but bent it to your will. My new dawn wasn't just the absence of Marcus, it was the presence of purpose. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free.